So in this one, we're going to look a bit deeper into the job side. And if you remember back in the middle of last year, we were talking about how things are structurally different. And that's one of the reasons why we didn't think the participation rate was really going to get back to where it was. And now as more of the data comes out, as more things start to come and kind of back up that view, we're seeing this, the great retirement. So when you look at COVID-19 led to a spike in U.S. baby boomers leaving the workforce, and you can see exactly when that started. And could have been a buyout. This could have been like people saying, look, we need to reduce workforce. We're trying to lay people off, and here's the package. So the pandemic has meant a continuation and acceleration of an increase in U.S. baby boomers leaving the workforce per Kansas City Fed. Many retirees haven't been swayed to return due to pandemic-related health risks. So this is something where you're seeing some of these individuals become 1099s, which just means that they're consultants and they're not coming back as W-2s. And you're just, they're trying to do spot work, whether that be 10 to 20 hours a week instead of going back full time. And that's the structural shift that we think is going to remain in the system. And that's when you start looking at, older people have left the labor force in large numbers, and you get an idea of where. And obviously the stock market has exploded. So if you have a 401k and you lock it in now, why would I go back? Now I have the money that I need. Everything is now in due course, and everything can kind of move on from here. So I think those are some of the key pieces that are keeping some of these levels fairly low, even though there are the jobs available for different people that want to come back to work. So why workers are seeking new jobs in 2022, seeking better pay and benefits, which again I think that makes sense, because if you maintained your job through the pandemic, maybe you got a small bump. So if you're sitting there working at a Marriott and you're getting paid $15 an hour, let's call it $17 an hour because you got a $2 raise, and you look across the street and they're hiring for $19, why wouldn't I just go take that? And that's where you're starting to get some of these movements. Job I'm passionate about, that's something that I think everybody likes to believe, but it's hard to achieve. And then poor working conditions. And then I think the bigger one, though, that I want to talk about is want to continue working remotely. And I think that's a big pivot that is going to become a bit stickier when you start looking at flexible schedules and remote work, where people just don't want the commute. And that's something that I think is going to continue to come up in the underlying backdrop. All the while, the U.S. employment rate continues to collapse. So when you look at the total at 3.9% and then adjusted for the drop in participation rate, 6.2%, and depending on which one you're using, you're getting an idea of, we're getting pretty close to natural unemployment. And at what point, and this is when you start looking at what the Fed is doing, that's why another reason you're starting to see an acceleration of, we should really stop easing. Why are we doing this? We should start raising rates. Why are we doing this? If the mandate is manage inflation, manage full employment, inflation's at 7%. You want it at about 2%. And when you look at it, depending on whatever metric you're using, we're either right near, right below, or right above natural unemployment, and we have rates at 25 basis points, and you're buying $120 billion of bonds and mortgage-backed securities. Why? And that's why I think one of the things that is starting to wake people up to that fact. And now when you look at U.S. unemployment rate and labor status, flows contribution, you get an idea of, remain unemployed, that's shrinking, new labor force entrant. You're seeing this really continue to collapse. Lost job contribution to unemployment rate is at its lowest since the pandemic began. Remain unemployed still makes up a bulk of the headline rate. And that's not going to go away all that soon, as we talked about last week and the week before. A lot of that is made up with because of childcare. One spouse is working, so childcare is expensive, so they're going to stay home, and that person's going to go to work, and you're starting to see some of that slowdown, those are the individuals that are going to remain unemployed, which is where some of that stickiness will come in, but still, again, moving in the right direction. So then when you look at December non-farm payrolls, which were much weaker at 199,000 versus the estimate of 447,000, that's when, again, that leveling off that we've talked about, that sharp move back up, and now that really kind of slow grind back up, because some of these companies are never going to get back to where they were. They may have had 10 people retire out of 100, and they don't need to replace those 10 jobs. Or they, like as I've said, if you had 100 people, 50 were laid off, 25 would come back quickly, and maybe only 10 to 15 would come back again, but the remainder would never get hired back to that company because they already had too many employees. And that's, I think, some of the things that are playing out here. Then at the same time, now there's also seasonality in this, because for anyone that has ever been looking for a job, there is no worse time than November, the end of November. December is a dead month. January is a dead month. And then February starts to pick back up because people quit their jobs after they get their bonuses in December, January, February, depending on month end or year end for the company that you're working for. And then after you get your bonus, then you quit. So that's where I don't think it's unreasonable to see this, but December payrolls, based on the trend, Google search trends, job seeking and recruiting interest has dropped, signaling a bit of a slowdown in labor activity. I would call that just seasonal. I don't know. And then typically this accelerates again as hiring picks back up. You have you have a fresh budget. You know who quit. So now you can start going out and hiring, which is why typically, depending on how early, it could be February, but typically March, April, and May are like the perfect months to really find a new job. So now talking about that unemployment rate and the natural rate. And so there's always going to be people that are going to quit. There's always going to be layoffs. So you're never going to get to zero. So the natural unemployment rate is typically set by the Fed based on some calculations. And you can see that we are below what is deemed now that natural unemployment rate. And that's why, again, that acceleration for Fed activity to do something. And then the prime age employment to population ratio improved, but still remains below pre-COVID. Now, until we get either wages going up, which then so say a husband or a wife can look at this and say, all right, well, if I go back to the office, I'm going to get paid X, but my child care has gone up by 20%. My food has gone up by 15%. Takeout's gone up by 25%. So I really don't want to get takeout. My health insurance has gone up. My commuting cost has gone up. So if I go back to the office now, what am I making net? And I think that's the problem that people are falling into. So until you get even though all of these costs have gone up, I'm going to make more because I'm going to get a 25% bump in pay. Now you're going to see some interest coming back. And that is where we continue to see that constraint on when do we get that population ratio improvement. And that's something that I don't think is appreciated kind of in the market right now. And that's why when you look at the labor force participation rate, 25 to 54, it's flat. And that's exactly what we've been talking about with the rate unchanged at 81.9%. And I don't see that improving in the near term. And then when you look at the average hourly earnings, and this is, again, looking at average hourly earnings, not adjusting for real, it was stronger at 0.6 versus 0.4. But based on how the real number came out that we talked about in segment 2, this is going to continue to drift lower, which is, again, that pressure that we've highlighted. And then when we shift over into something else, when we look into the occupancy rates for professionally managed apartment buildings, rents are going up. People who are living and renting are going up because that shift to home ownership has really slowed. And this is what we've highlighted with who is your next incremental buyer. And this is the one that we continue to it shows what we've been discussing with number. And one of the other reasons why is, well, housing starts are up, but completed are down because of the supply chain, because of the lack of equipment and materials. You haven't been able to complete some of these jobs, which is why we've seen some of this slowdown. But while all of this is happening, you have the revolving consumer credit going back up, because you have wages that are under pressure, you have rents that are going back up, you have living wages going up, food going up, energy going up, sticky inflation going up, which is that living wage. So people are back to borrowing from their credit cards. They're back from borrowing to maintain the lifestyle that they have. Now, this is the other reason why when we look at personal consumption, since the beginning of 2021, nominal personal consumption spending has continued to grow at a solid pace. While real spending has increased as well, its pace has weakened given the rise of inflation. And this is just people looking to buy less, because as prices go up, you're pivoting. You're like, well, is there a replacement? Is there a store brand? Is there a generic brand so I can still get what I need but not pay the same premium? And again, these are some of the pivots that I think are going to accelerate as we continue through the remainder of really the year. U.S. November manufacturing orders, factory orders were up 1.6% versus the estimate of 1.2%, and orders ex transports are up 0.8% versus the estimate of 1.1%. So you're seeing some slowdown, but again, that activity still remains there. It's still a positive, and that's one of the strengths that we talk about when we're looking at the makeup of and the calculation of GDP. So then when we take this and we look at the trade deficit, well, the trade deficit came in at 80.2 billion versus 81 billion estimate, back to all-time worst. And as imports continue, as we talk about in the EIA show, especially segment 2, as we talked in segment 1 of the Econ show about the problems that we're seeing with shipping, with cost, this is going to remain elevated. Now, just again, wrapping up on kind of where some of these views are when we look at the forecasted change. So the view on the forecast is that this starts to normalize when you're looking at the percentage on the housing front. But then when you look at rent, so single family rent index year over year, and this is what we've been talking about, is depending on low tier, middle tier, high tier, high middle tier, high tier. All of these are up anywhere from 10% to 12%. But yet rent in the CPI is at 3%. So this is where we continue to see these pressures that are going to continue to move through the system. All the while, apartment seeking is in free fall because people are just staying in their location. They're not looking to move because rents have gone up. And this is, again, leading into those slowdowns, supporting what we've been seeing where people are just staying put. You're not going to see the movements that the housing side is also going to continue to weaken as we continue through the remainder of really this year, in my opinion. Obviously seasonally adjusted, things will get better in spring and summer, but then, but not to the same level, obviously, that we've seen. So that wraps up what we have for the U.S. And in the next segment, we'll look at Europe and what are some of the key indicators that are coming out from there about the economy and kind of where we sit for Q1 of 2022.